What if the man you admired most turned out to be hiding everything? What if your father, your idol, your very blood, betrayed your mother in silence for years, and no one had the courage to say it out loud? No one except you? Jake Reiner didn't plan to become the detonator of a media firestorm. He didn't want to be the son who shattered the illusion of the perfect Hollywood family. And yet, that's exactly what happened. Because one decision, one live moment in front of cameras, reporters, and millions watching online would rip apart the curtain hiding decades of deception, double lives, and death. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Yes, death, but we'll get to that. Because before the screams, before the arrest, before the headlines accusing their son of murder, there was a photo, a single, haunting photo that Jake Reiner released to the world. And with it, everything changed. But before we dive into the murder, the betrayal, the warning from a daughter too late to stop tragedy, we need to understand why Jake snapped. Because this wasn't a publicity stunt. It wasn't a ratings ploy. It was personal. And it was decades in the making. Let's rewind, not to the night of the murder, not even to the release of the damning photos. Let's rewind to the moment Rob Reiner became untouchable. Rob Reiner is a name that demands respect in Hollywood. Director of classics like Stand By Me, A Few Good Men, When Harry Met Sally, The Princess Bride. His fingerprints are on generations of American storytelling. He wasn't just a filmmaker. He was a brand, a progressive voice, a devoted husband, a proud father, or so we thought. For decades, Rob was seen publicly beside his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner. Their marriage, one of the few stable ones in an industry littered with divorces and scandals. They raised children, attended premieres, smiled for the cameras. But behind closed doors, something was off. And Jake knew it. He just didn't know how bad it really was. Now imagine being Jake Reiner, the son of a Hollywood titan, a journalist, a public figure in his own right, but always in the shadow. You grow up watching your parents smile for cameras, give awards speeches, donate to causes. The perfect family, the progressive dream. But then you see the little things. Missed birthdays, late-night phone calls your mother pretends not to hear, trips that don't add up, excuses that repeat, eyes that don't quite meet. You ask questions as a kid. You stop asking as an adult. But the answers, they never go away. And when Jake found what he found, tucked away, buried in a drawer that wasn't supposed to be opened, the silence ended. It started with a photograph. Let's stop here and ask the real question. Would you expose your own father if you knew he was cheating? Would you shatter your family's image, your own legacy, just to tell the truth? Jake did. And it didn't just cost him relationships. It triggered a chain reaction so horrific, no one was left untouched. Because truth doesn't just shine light. Sometimes it burns. The day Jake went public was unassuming. It was a charity gala. Lights, laughter, a room full of power. A live interview on the red carpet, something he'd done 100 times before. And then, Jake dropped the bomb. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He simply said, live and on record. I think we need to stop pretending certain marriages are faithful just because the people in them make good movies. The host chuckled. Nervous laughter. But Jake didn't blink. He added, some fathers deserve statues. Others deserve subpoenas. The silence was immediate, deafening. Rob Reiner wasn't present at the gala, but his name was in everyone's minds. And within 24 hours, the photos appeared. Now, you might be wondering, why now? Why release these photos after all these years? Why go public with private family trauma? The truth is, Jake didn't intend to go public. He intended to warn someone. And that's where things get darker. Because those closest to the Reiner family claimed this wasn't just about an affair. It was about a pattern. A pattern that allegedly endangered more than one life. A pattern that might explain why Jake broke protocol, broke silence, and eventually broke down. Because in the days that followed the live call-out, Jake went quiet. No more tweets. No interviews. No clarifications. But what surfaced instead were whispers. It started with the housekeeper's anonymous statement. Then a leaked police report from 3 years prior, involving a domestic disturbance that never made the papers. Then Michelle, Jake's mother, who reportedly began sleeping in a separate wing of their Brentwood estate. You see, what was painted as a happy home was crumbling for years. And Jake, whether out of love or desperation, finally pulled the fire alarm. But it wasn't enough. Because within a week, both Rob and Michelle Reiner would be dead. And Jake would disappear from the public eye. Wait. Pause. Let's recap. A Hollywood icon. A hidden affair. A son who exposes the truth, live. Leaked photos that question everything. And within days, a brutal double homicide. Coincidence? That's what some want you to believe. But if you're still watching, you know better. Because in just a few minutes, we're going to walk you through the night of the murders and why the Reiner's daughter, Romy, pointed the finger inside the house. But first, we need to follow the photo. Because this wasn't just any snapshot. It was a doorway to betrayal, to lies, and possibly to motive. By now, the internet had exploded. The photo that Jake allegedly leaked showed his father, Rob Reiner, at an exclusive resort in Europe, smiling, holding hands with a woman who wasn't Michelle. Time-stamped, geotagged, unfiltered. What made it worse? The woman in question was identified as a production assistant, half Rob's age, who had previously worked on one of his films. She had disappeared from the industry after a sudden, hush-hush sabbatical. The timeline was damning. While Rob was promoting family values in interviews, the timestamp on that photo placed him overseas, on what could only be called a romantic getaway. And Jake had the receipts. But here's where it gets murky. Jake didn't send the photo to the tabloids. He posted it, cryptically, on his private Instagram. A black and white upload. Captioned only. The truth has teeth. Fans weren't sure what it meant at first. Then the sleuths got involved. And suddenly, the internet put it all together. By now, public opinion was split. Some praised Jake for standing up. Others accused him of exploiting his family. But no one was prepared for what came next. Because the photo wasn't just a scandal. It may have been a trigger. Because just 5 days after it went viral, emergency services were called to the Reiner estate. And what they found would horrify the world. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does it sound like when a family implodes? Not behind closed doors, but in front of cameras? If you had just glanced at the footage, you wouldn't have seen it coming. A red carpet, a charity gala, velvet ropes, media personnel swarming like bees, flashes going off every second. This was just another Hollywood night. Glittery, controlled, polished, until Jake Reiner grabbed the mic. Not with his hands, with his voice. He wasn't even supposed to speak. He was accompanying a friend. Low profile. The son of a legend, yes, but not the main event. He stood to the side of the press line, smiling politely, nodding at familiar faces. Then a reporter recognized him. Jake Reiner, you've kept a low profile lately. What brings you out tonight? A harmless question. The kind that elicits a generic answer. Just here to support, or a great cause. That sort of thing. But Jake didn't smile. He paused, his jaw locked, his eyes, burning with something far deeper than media fatigue. Stared straight into the camera. And then, in one sentence, he blew everything up. I think we need to stop pretending certain marriages are faithful, just because the people in them make good movies. A silence fell. It wasn't just awkward, it was electric. A Hollywood gala where names are protected like royal titles. And here was Jake, slicing through the facade like a scalpel. The interviewer tried to recover. Nervous laughter bubbled out. Jake doubled down. Some fathers deserve statues, he said slowly. Others deserve subpoenas. No one moved. That was the moment the air changed. Because this wasn't vague shade. This wasn't subtext. This was a son shoving his father's pedestal over in front of the entire industry. Let's pause and be real. Would you have done it? Would you have said that, knowing the cameras were rolling? Knowing your father's name was practically a Hollywood landmark? Jake did. But what's more shocking is how he said it. No theatrics. No shouting. It was almost cold. Controlled. As if this moment had been rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times. And now, finally, he was hitting record. Because here's what you don't see unless you're really watching. Jake wasn't just venting. He was warning. In the days leading up to the gala, insiders now say Jake had been restless. Withdrawn. On edge is the term one close friend used. He'd pulled out of several public engagements. Canceled interviews. Cut short a podcast taping mid-session. Something was brewing. But no one knew what. And then, bam, this. A televised, unscripted, unsparing takedown of his own father's morality. No names, but no ambiguity either. Within minutes, social media lit up. Who was Jake talking about? Did Rob Reiner cheat? Why now? And perhaps the most terrifying question, what does Jake know that we don't? Because the truth is, Jake's words didn't sound like mere bitterness. They sounded like evidence. And that terrified people. Even those closest to the Reiners had never seen Jake act out publicly. He was known for his composure, for respecting boundaries, for staying out of the Hollywood circus, not throwing grenades into it. But this wasn't a meltdown. It was a message, and it was just the beginning. Let's talk about the moment after the interview. Jake walked away from the reporter calmly. No follow-up, no backtracking, just disappeared into the gala crowd like nothing happened. But that crowd? It was frozen. Phones were buzzing. PR agents were panicking. And the whispers began. Did he mean Rob? Did he mean his dad? Are there photos? The answer to all of those questions would arrive in exactly 24 hours. You see, the beauty, or horror, of a live takedown is that you can't erase it. You can't edit it. You can't scrub it from the airwaves. It's there. Raw. Permanent. And that's exactly what Jake wanted. He wanted people to talk. He wanted the cameras to roll. He wanted the industry, the public, us to question everything we thought we knew about his father. Why? Because the real story wasn't the cheating. It was the consequences of keeping it hidden. Here's something you probably didn't know. Michelle Reiner, Rob's wife of decades, had reportedly become reclusive in the last 2 years. Friends say she stopped attending premieres, skipped red carpet events, and even backed out of charity boards she'd co-chaired for years. She was tired, they said. She wanted to focus on her health. But now, in hindsight, those excuses feel hollow. Was she protecting herself? Was she hiding heartbreak? Or was she scared? Jake's words weren't just about infidelity. They were about a family dynamic so broken, so suffocating, that the only way out was exposure. And if people hated him for it, so be it. Because the cost of silence, Jake believed, was far greater than the cost of shame. Now let's rewind just a little further. In the weeks before the gala, Jake reportedly attempted a private intervention. According to leaked texts, he had approached his father with questions. Hard ones. The kind that crack masks. Are you seeing someone? Does mom know? Do you even care what this is doing to the family? The replies? Non-committal. Deflective. Cold. And then, silence. Jake's phone went unanswered. His messages left on read. And that was it. The bridge, already crumbling, collapsed. So when Jake stood before cameras, he wasn't making a scene. He was building a case. And the industry watched in stunned silence as he laid down his opening argument. The aftermath was swift. Headlines. Tweets. Think pieces. Even former co-stars of Rob Reiner chimed in, cautiously, vaguely. He's a complex man. There's a lot the public doesn't see. That kind of language. Hollywoodese for maybe Jake's not wrong. But then came the real bomb. Jake posted to his private Instagram a photo that no one expected to see. It wasn't blurry. It wasn't cropped. It was crystal clear. Rob Reiner, smiling, on a yacht, next to a woman half his age. Their hands interlocked. The caption? Just 5 words. The truth has teeth. Remember. And remember we did. That photo spread like wildfire. News outlets scrambled to confirm its authenticity. And yes, it was real. Geotagged. Time-stamped. Undeniable. Rob's lawyers tried to downplay it. A private vacation. A platonic friend. But the damage was done. Jake hadn't just implied something. He'd proven it. And once you show the public proof, they never unsee it. Now let's circle back to that live moment. Because here's the twist. Many believe Jake's comments at the gala were a test. A way to see who would protect the illusion and who would support the truth. Some family members, reportedly, begged him to take the post down. Others went radio silent. And still others, one in particular, would later do something far more shocking. Romy Reiner, Jake's younger sister, would call the police. And she would name someone inside the family as a dangerous presence. Someone the authorities needed to watch closely. But we'll get to that. Because before Romy made that call, before the police sirens echoed through Brentwood, before the news broke that Rob and Michelle Reiner were both dead, the house was still standing. And the facade, though cracked, was still intact. Jake had struck the first blow, but someone else would finish what he started. And what came next would make that live humiliation look like a whisper. Have you ever seen a photo that made your stomach drop? Not because of what it showed, but because of what it meant? That's exactly what happened the moment Jake Reiner posted that picture. It didn't scream. It didn't accuse. It simply existed. But in its quietness, it destroyed everything. Because the truth is, the photo wasn't just evidence of an affair. It was a countdown. A moment frozen in time that revealed a lie too heavy to bury and too dangerous to ignore. And Jake? He hadn't planned to share it. Not yet. Not like this. Let's go back. Long before the gala, before Jake stood in front of cameras and detonated the family's illusion, he already had the photo. It was sent to him anonymously, months earlier. The file was unmarked, with no message, no context. But Jake knew what it was the moment he opened it. There, staring back at him on his laptop screen, was his father, Rob Reiner, shirt open, sunglasses on, lounging on the sun deck of a private yacht. A drink in one hand, and in the other, the hand of a woman who wasn't his wife. Her head was resting on his shoulder. Their legs touched. Their eyes locked, not in conversation, but in intimacy. That's not friendship. That's not speculation. That's something you can't fake. You know that kind of photo. We all do. Jake stared at it for hours. Not minutes. Not seconds. Hours. He zoomed in. Out. Analyzed every detail. The timestamp? June 12th. 2 years ago. The location? Amalfi Coast, Italy. But here's the twist. Rob had claimed, publicly and privately, that he was in New York during that time, shooting a documentary, taking interviews. And Michelle? She was recovering from back surgery in Los Angeles. Alone. So the timeline didn't just raise questions. It shattered alibis. Still, Jake didn't post it. He didn't scream or leak or blackmail. Instead, he did what many children of powerful parents do. He confronted quietly. He printed the photo. No watermark. No digital trail. Just paper. And he brought it to his father's home, sat down across from the man he once idolized, and slid the photo across the table like a ceasefire letter. No yelling. No threats. Just this. Who is she? Rob didn't speak for a full minute. Then he reached for the photo and tore it in half. Jake picked up the pieces and walked out the door. Why didn't Jake go public immediately? Because, according to close friends, he still believed in redemption. He thought his father might confess, might come clean, might apologize to Michelle, to the family, to the lie they had all been forced to smile through. But none of that happened. Instead, Rob went silent. And within weeks, Jake was cut off. No calls, no visits, no family dinners. He was iced out like a scandal waiting to happen. And that's when something even darker occurred. Jake's inbox started receiving strange messages. They weren't direct threats. Nothing explicit. Just vague warnings. You're making a mistake. Family should stay loyal. Some things are bigger than you. Anonymous accounts. No names. No photos. Jake tried to trace them. Failed. Was it a coordinated smear campaign? A warning from his father's team? A sibling trying to control the damage? We don't know. But Jake understood the message. Stay quiet. Don't ruin the Reiner name. Protect the legacy, even if it's built on lies. But here's the thing. Jake wasn't angry for the cheating. He was angry for what came next. Because after the confrontation, after the tear and silence and exile, Michelle changed. Friends say she became haunted. She rarely left the Brentwood estate. She stopped attending charity events, declined interviews, and canceled several gallery openings she had organized. According to a neighbor, Michelle was often seen walking alone at night, restless, pacing, like she was waiting for something that never came. Was it guilt, shame, or something more terrifying, like fear? Now ask yourself, what would you do? If your mother was suffering silently, your father refused to speak, and the truth was rotting like a corpse beneath a floorboard. Would you expose it? Jake did. And when he did, the silence turned into screams. But not the kind you expect. Because no one in the family publicly acknowledged the photo. Not Rob. Not Michelle. Not Nick. Not Romy. It was as if the post didn't exist. As if Jake had shouted into a canyon, and everyone else refused to echo. But the public heard it loud and clear. Media outlets began investigating. The woman in the photo was soon identified as a former assistant director on one of Rob's unreleased film projects. Let's call her Samantha, to preserve her privacy. Samantha had disappeared from the public eye shortly after production wrapped. Industry whispers claimed she received a sudden, unexpected settlement. A non-disclosure agreement followed, and her online presence? Scrubbed clean. Now, With the photo exposed, people began asking, was this just an affair? Or was there more? Was Samantha silenced? Paid off? Or worse, was she threatened? Jake never commented on the woman's identity. He refused to answer media inquiries, shut down his own socials, went dark. But one source close to him claimed he was devastated, not by the affair itself, but by the system that enabled it. Hollywood PR machines, legal cleanups, family secrets sealed in marble. Jake wanted to crack that open, not to destroy, but to protect the ones still living in the wreckage, namely, his mother. And this is where things turn tragic, because just 3 weeks after the photo exploded online, Michelle Reiner filed for divorce. Quietly, no press release, no court appearance, just a private document filed through attorneys requesting separation due to irreconcilable differences. That was the final straw. Jake believed she had finally broken free. But what none of them could predict was that within a matter of days, she would be dead, stabbed, alongside her husband, in the very home where this secret had festered, in the very room where that photo was first torn in half. Do you see it now? This wasn't about a picture. It was about a pattern, one that started with silence, escalated through exposure, and ended in blood. But what makes this story even more horrifying? That photo? It wasn't the only one. Jake had more. What if everything you thought you knew about a love story was fake? What if the smiles were staged, the gestures rehearsed, the chemistry choreographed, not for love, but for optics? Because in the case of Rob and Michelle Reiner, what we saw was a marriage praised, celebrated, admired. But what we didn't see was the war behind the curtains. And the damage? It went far deeper than a broken heart. It cracked the foundation of an entire family. Let's start with what the world believed. Rob and Michelle Reiner were Hollywood's quiet power couple. No constant drama, no paparazzi scandals, no public screaming matches, just decades of side-by-side appearances. Political activism, red carpet smiles, family vacations, Oscars and charity galas. They were the opposite of tabloid fodder. They were safe, and that's exactly how they wanted it. But safety in Hollywood usually comes with a price. And in their case, it was silence. The truth is, Michelle wasn't just Rob's wife. She was a former photographer, a patron of the arts, an intelligent, sharp-witted woman who had once said in an interview, "I prefer the background." That's where real influence lies. Subtle, quiet, controlled. But those close to her, house staff, longtime friends, a few trusted journalists, say something changed in the last 5 years. Michelle withdrew. She stopped hosting intimate dinner parties. She stopped attending premieres unless absolutely necessary. And even when she did show up, her eyes didn't sparkle like they used to. She wasn't present. She was enduring, smiling like it hurt. People talk, of course. In Hollywood, they always do. But the Reiners were good at image management. Every time a whisper came up, it was smoothed over with PR. They're just busy. She's focused on charity work. He's in post-production hell again. Excuses wrapped in bow ties. But the tension? It leaked through in the details. There's one moment in particular that tells the story. A red carpet event, just a few years ago. Rob and Michelle arrived together. Flashes, cameras, cheers. But as they're walking, a reporter asks Rob about his beautiful partner of 30 years. He grins, and without hesitation, he says, "She's my best supporter. Always has been. Always will be." Michelle glances at him, barely smiles, and then turns away. It's small, subtle, but unmistakable. That wasn't admiration. That was distance. People close to Michelle say she knew about the affairs for years. Plural. Yes, affairs. Samantha, the woman in the yacht photo, may have been the most damning. But she wasn't the first. Michelle's friends say she had discovered texts, once found receipts for hotel rooms. And on one occasion, Rob accidentally left his laptop open, revealing an unsent email to a younger actress who had recently starred in one of his indie films. The subject line? Let's be honest about what this is. No one knows if it was ever sent. But Michelle saw it, and she never confronted him about it. Not directly. So why didn't she leave? Why do so many women stay? The reasons are never simple. And in Michelle's case, they were complex, layered, and deeply emotional. One friend confided. She told me once, "If I leave, I stop being his wife and start being the woman who left Rob Reiner. I'll lose me." That's not love. That's identity entrapment. Years of being someone else's shadow until your own name disappears. And then there were the children. Nick, Jake, Romy. Michelle adored them. She once said in a private fundraising speech, "If I get nothing else right in this world, let me at least be a good mother." And she was. But motherhood comes with sacrifice. And sometimes silence. Because when you're protecting your children from the truth of your marriage, you convince yourself the pain is worth it. Until it's not. Jake, as we've seen, eventually snapped. Romy? She stayed quiet, but observant. And Nick? Well, his story is a storm waiting in the wings. But in this chapter, it's Michelle who matters most. Because she endured a quiet war no one saw. And in the last months of her life, that war turned inward. Her health reportedly declined. Chronic fatigue, trouble sleeping, anxiety. She rarely left her bedroom. Security staff at the Brentwood estate say they didn't see her for days at a time. And when she did emerge, she looked broken, thin, tired, sad, not angry, just gone. But here's the part that will haunt you. Just 6 weeks before her death, Michelle reportedly visited a divorce attorney. She didn't file anything at the time, just asked questions, talked numbers, discussed property, custody of assets, even what public messaging might look like. In other words, she was preparing to walk away. She was finally ready. And that's why Jake believed so deeply that the truth had to be exposed. Because for the first time, she wanted out. And maybe, just maybe, the photo would give her the strength to leave. Instead, it may have triggered something far worse. Because Michelle never followed through. The documents were never filed. And within 6 weeks, she was dead, stabbed, beside the man who had humiliated her for years. In the home she once decorated for Christmas, filled with photographs, laughter, and unspoken grief. So now we have to ask the hardest question yet. Was this just a broken marriage that unraveled? Or was it something far more sinister? Was there someone who wanted the truth buried again? Someone who believed the photo, the divorce, the exposure, was too dangerous to allow? Jake believed so, and so did someone else. Because just days before the murders, someone made a call to the police. And what they said would blow this entire case wide open. But we'll get there. Because before that call, something else happened. Something that shocked even Jake. He received another photo. This time, it wasn't anonymous. It was mailed, printed, handwritten note attached. 5 words. "You think you know everything?" And what that photo showed made the first one look like a love letter. What do you do when the danger isn't outside your house, but inside it? Do you stay quiet to protect the family name? Or do you make a call that can never be taken back? Because once Romy Reiner picked up the phone, there was no undoing what followed. And whatever you believe about what happened next, one thing is undeniable. Romy knew something was wrong before anyone else did. Let's rewind to the days immediately after Jake's photo went public. The family was in lockdown mode. Phones stopped ringing. Emails went unanswered. Lawyers took over communication. Security around the Brentwood estate quietly doubled. From the outside, it looked like crisis management. From the inside, it felt like fear. Romy was 27 at the time, the youngest, the one who stayed out of the spotlight the most, the one people assumed didn't want to get involved. But that assumption was wrong. Because Romy had been watching everything for years, and what she saw didn't sit right. Friends say Romy was the first to notice the emotional temperature of the house changing after Jake's confrontation. Not anger, not grief, something tighter, something controlled, a kind of silence that presses against your chest. One friend described it like this. It felt like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something bad to happen. And Romy felt that pressure more than anyone. Because unlike Jake, she still went home, still sat at the dinner table, still heard the doors close at night, still saw who avoided eye contact and who didn't. Here's what rarely gets discussed. Romy didn't agree with Jake going public, at least not at first. She thought the exposure would make things worse, more volatile, more unpredictable. And she was right. After the photo spread, arguments in the house reportedly escalated. Not shouting matches. Worse, low-voiced confrontations. Doors closing slowly. People retreating into rooms and locking them. Silence used as a weapon. According to a source close to the family, Romy had a private conversation with Michelle 2 nights before the call to police. It was late. They were in the kitchen, only one light on. Michelle looked exhausted. Romy asked her directly, "Are you safe here?" Michelle didn't answer right away. She just stared at the countertop. Then she said something that still echoes in Romy's mind. I don't know who I'm married to anymore. That wasn't an accusation. That was fear. Romy pressed further. She asked if her mother wanted to stay somewhere else. A hotel. A friend's place. Anywhere. Michelle shook her head. No, she said. If I leave now, it'll get worse. That sentence alone raises 100 questions. Worse how? For whom? And why did Michelle believe staying was safer than leaving? That night, Romy barely slept. She stayed in her room, phone in hand, scrolling through messages she never sent. Calling the police crossed her mind more than once. But calling the police on your own family? That's not a decision you make lightly. That's a line you don't cross unless you believe something irreversible is coming. And by morning, Romy believed it was. The call was placed mid-morning. Not a 911 emergency call. A non-emergency line. That detail matters. It tells us Romy wasn't reacting to a crime. She was reacting to a threat. According to reports, Romy told the dispatcher there was a dangerous family member in the household. She didn't name names. She didn't describe weapons. She didn't accuse anyone of a crime. But she was clear about one thing. Someone inside the home should be considered a suspect if anything happens. Think about that. If anything happens, not if something already had. That's not hindsight. That's foresight. Police documented the call. They logged it. But without an immediate incident, there was little they could legally do. No restraining orders requested. No visible injuries. No explicit threats on record. So the call became a note. A warning filed away. And that's where it stayed. Until it was too late. Romy didn't tell her siblings she'd called. Not Jake. Not Nick. Why? Because she didn't want to escalate things. She thought maybe, just maybe, the knowledge that authorities were aware would be enough to keep everyone on their best behavior. A silent deterrent. But silence has a way of backfiring. Because when people think no one is watching, they show you who they really are. Now let's talk about the night before everything fell apart. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Security footage later showed limited movement. Lights going off early. No guests. No disturbances. But Romy didn't like the energy. She stayed in her room again. Door locked. Phone charged. She later told investigators she had a bad feeling she couldn't explain. You know that feeling, don't you? The one you brush off as anxiety, until it's not. The next morning, Romy woke up to silence. No voices. No movement. That's when she knew something was wrong. She went to her parents' wing of the house. Knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Still nothing. What she found next would define the rest of her life. But we won't go there yet. Because before discovery comes the question that refuses to go away. Why did Romy call the police before anything happened? What did she see? What did she hear? And why was she so certain that if something went wrong, the danger would come from within? Some believe Romy was trying to protect her mother. Others believe she was trying to protect the truth. And a few believe she was trying to protect someone else entirely. Because here's the part that complicates everything. Romy's warning didn't just point outward. It pointed inward, toward the family itself. And that includes the one person no one wanted to suspect. The son who lived on the property. The son whose name would soon dominate headlines. Nick Reiner. But before the arrest, before the charges, before the words first-degree murder ever appeared in print, there was one night, one final evening, and one decision that set everything in motion. And when we reconstruct that night, step by step, the timeline doesn't just raise questions. It screams them. And what happened next would shock even the investigators. Sometimes, it's not the screaming that wakes you up. It's the silence. The kind of silence that presses against the walls, sneaks under the door, and makes your skin tighten. The kind of silence that means something is very, very wrong. That was the kind of silence hanging over the Reiner estate on the night of December 14th. And by morning, 2 people were dead. Let's reconstruct that night. Step by step, minute by minute. Because once you lay out the facts, the silence starts speaking. And what it says is chilling. It started like any other evening. The estate was locked up by 9 p.m. Cameras engaged. Lights dimmed. Personal security on standby. Rob and Michelle reportedly had dinner in the main house. Not out. Not with guests. Just the 2 of them. Nick, their 32-year-old son, lived in the guest house about 50 feet away, separate entrance, separate security access. He'd lived there for years. Romy was home, too. Upstairs. Staying in her childhood room for the holidays. Jake, notably, wasn't there. He hadn't been invited. Not after the photo. Not after the fallout. At 9:23 p.m., a motion sensor was triggered in the side hallway of the main house. Security log recorded it. But no alarm was tripped. Why? Because the person moving through the hallway had valid access. Someone with a code. Someone the system recognized. That detail matters. Because it narrows the suspects immediately. Only 4 people had full access codes to the house that night. Rob, Michelle, Romy, Nick, and Rob and Michelle would be dead by morning. At 10:14 p.m., another sensor was triggered, this time in the master bedroom. No forced entry. No struggle. Just movement. Again, no alarm. Just a log. Then the cameras go dark for exactly 7 minutes. Glitch? Power surge? Manual override? Investigators still don't agree. But what we know is that at 10:21 p.m., the hallway camera outside the master bedroom comes back online. And no one is in the frame. The house is quiet. Still. Too still. Romy later told police she heard nothing unusual that night. No voices. No shouting. No crashes. Just silence. She fell asleep around 11 p.m. And when she woke up at 7:12 a.m. the next morning, she knew something was wrong. Because the house still felt frozen. The hallway lights were still off. No coffee brewing. No voices downstairs. And her parents, creatures of habit, were always up before her. Always. She went downstairs. Called out. No response. Walked to the master bedroom door. Closed. Knocked. Still no answer. She opened the door. And that's when the screams finally came. The scene she discovered was brutal. Rob and Michelle Reiner. Both stabbed. Multiple times. Lying in a twisted, final embrace on the bedroom floor. No weapons in sight. No signs of forced entry. No shattered glass. No busted locks. No blood trail leading out of the room. Whoever did it fast. And clean. And cold. Romy's 911 call was breathless. Terrified. But here's the detail that still haunts people. Before she gave the dispatcher her address, she said one name. Nick. That name would launch a homicide investigation, a media firestorm, and a family collapse that would spill into every newspaper, every podcast, every YouTube rabbit hole. But at the time, it was just a whisper that would become a scream. Police arrived on scene at 7:38 a.m. By then, Romy had already texted Jake. One line. Come home. It's bad. Jake's response was immediate. Are they alive? No reply. Just silence. Officers cleared the scene. Romy was questioned on site. Her story didn't change. She hadn't heard anything. Hadn't seen anything. But when asked if anyone in the family might have wanted to harm Rob or Michelle, she hesitated. Then, quietly, she told them about the call she'd made days earlier. About the warning. About the dangerous family member. She still didn't say Nick's name out loud. But by then, the officers had already turned their attention toward the guest house. And what they found next only deepened the mystery. Nick Reiner was home. Asleep. Or pretending to be. Police knocked for 5 full minutes before he answered the door. He looked groggy. Confused. Disoriented. They asked if he'd heard anything during the night. He said no. They asked if he'd seen his parents. He said no. They asked if he'd been in the main house after 9 p.m. He said no. But the security log said otherwise. At 9:23 p.m., the system registered Nick's code entering the side hallway, and he never signed out. That, combined with Romy's earlier call, was enough to detain him. No handcuffs. Not yet. Just a calm escort to the cruiser for further questioning. Jake arrived at the scene just as Nick was being led to the car. The look on his face? Witnesses say he didn't cry. He didn't shout. He just stared. Like he knew. Let's ask the question nobody wants to ask. Was Nick Reiner capable of killing his own parents? To answer that, we need to go back. Years, not hours. Because what most people don't know is that Nick had demons. Real ones. He'd battled addiction for much of his adult life. Struggled with bipolar disorder. Been in and out of rehab. He'd had public fights with his father. Explosive ones. Jake once wrote in a blog post, now deleted, that Nick never got the same love I did. He got control, micromanagement, and then withdrawal. Michelle tried to bridge the gap, but it wasn't easy. The guest house wasn't a gift. It was a compromise, a way to keep Nick close without letting him all the way in. Some in the family called it compassion. Others called it containment. So was Nick spiraling? Was he triggered by the family explosion caused by Jake's revelations? Was he furious at the exposure? Or did he know something else was going on? Something darker? Something dangerous enough to silence both parents? Investigators say they found inconsistencies in Nick's timeline. Security footage showed him walking back toward the guest house around 10:45 p.m. Only a shadow, but his size, gait, and clothing matched what he wore the next morning. A knife was later discovered in a backyard drain, washed, but with trace DNA that matched both victims. It wasn't conclusive, but it was enough. Nick Reiner was arrested that same night, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The media exploded. Headlines screamed betrayal. The Sun, the guest house, the quiet kid turned alleged killer. But Jake? He stayed silent. For 3 days. Then he tweeted, "The silence in that house was always the real killer." But is that all there is? A family falling apart, a son arrested, a brutal night. Or is there more? Because some believe Nick didn't act alone, and others believe he didn't act at all. And when we look closer at the autopsy report, things start to shift again. Because it revealed something no one expected. A wound that doesn't fit, a timeline that doesn't align, and a possible visitor no one accounted for. And what came next would change the entire investigation. Sometimes, it's not the crime scene that tells the full story. It's the body. Because the dead don't lie. And when the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner released the autopsy reports on Rob and Michelle Reiner, the world braced for confirmation of what everyone already believed. A double homicide. Brutal. Tragic. Simple. But what they got instead was confusion. Because buried in the technical language, the cold scientific jargon, were phrases that changed everything. Phrases that investigators weren't ready for. Phrases like multiple sharp force injuries, non-defensive posturing, unclassified blunt trauma, inconsistent with initial cause, and most haunting of all, time of death undetermined due to variable avidity. Translation? We don't know exactly when, or even how, they died. Let's break this down. Rob and Michelle were found at approximately 7:12 a.m. by Romy. But according to the pathologist's initial estimate, their deaths likely occurred between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. That's a 4-hour window. Too wide. Especially for a house with working security logs, timestamps, and digital sensors. So why the uncertainty? Because of something called variable avidity. It refers to the pooling of blood after death, used to estimate time of death based on position and color changes. But in this case, it didn't follow the normal pattern. Why? Because their bodies had apparently been moved. Yes, you read that right. Moved. Sometime after death, and before Romy discovered them, Rob and Michelle's bodies had been repositioned. They were found side by side on the bedroom floor, facing each other, almost like they had died in an embrace. But the blood pooling told a different story. Rob had originally been lying on his back. Michelle had likely been face down. Someone had flipped them, rearranged them. Why? This is where the case takes a sharp left turn. Because now, we're not just talking about murder. We're talking about staging. And staging means planning. It means calculation. It means someone wanted to send a message or hide one. Now think about that. If this was a spontaneous act of rage, a crime of passion, why take the time to pose the bodies? Why try to make it look poetic? Some theorize it was an act of guilt. That the killer, perhaps Nick, couldn't bear to see what he'd done. So he made it look like they died together peacefully. But others think it was something more. Something calculated. Because there was one more detail in the autopsy that raised eyebrows across the board. One wound that didn't fit. Rob Reiner had a puncture wound to his left shoulder blade. Not deep. Not fatal. Almost like a warning strike. A don't move kind of injury. And it didn't match the angle of the other stabs. Different trajectory. Different depth. Different blade width. That suggests a second weapon. And possibly a second person. But who? Let's stop here and ask what everyone's thinking. If Nick did this alone, wouldn't the wounds be more consistent? Wouldn't the autopsy match a frenzied, solo attack? Instead, what we have is 2 different weapon types. Bodies moved after death. Inconsistent time of death estimates. No clear blood trail leading out of the room. And most suspiciously, no defensive wounds on Michelle. That last point is key. Because Michelle, by all accounts, should have fought back. She wasn't frail. She wasn't weak. If someone attacked her, she would have scratched, clawed, screamed. But her body showed no signs of struggle. Which begs the question, did she know the person who killed her? Did she let them close? Or was she sedated? Toxicology tests showed trace amounts of a prescription sedative, zolpidem, in Michelle's system. That's Ambien. But here's the twist. The amount in her system was higher than her prescription allowed. Much higher. Investigators found an empty pill bottle on her nightstand. But the date on the refill? Over a month old. So where did the extra pills come from? And why take more than usual on that night? Now let's add another layer. Security logs from the smart home system showed an access code used at 9:23 p.m. We assumed this was Nick. But new reports suggest a fifth code had been issued. An unregistered entry logged 2 weeks prior. Temporary. No name attached. No digital trace on the family's user interface. Just a line in the system. Temp access 5. Activated December 1st. Expired December 15th. Who had that code? Who used it? And why did it expire the day after the murders? Jake, when shown this information by investigators, reportedly went white. He asked one question, "Are you telling me someone else was in the house?" To which one officer replied, "We're not ruling it out." Here's where things get murky. Publicly, the case focused on Nick. He had motive. He had a record. He lived on the property. And his code accessed the house at the right time. But the autopsy, the body, refused to play along with that narrative. The second wound, the sedative, the staging, the extra code, all of it painted a picture far more complicated than the one we'd been told. And now, people were whispering the unthinkable. What if Nick was being framed? Let's talk about family dynamics. Jake had exposed the scandal. Romy had issued the warning. Michelle wanted to divorce. Rob was losing control. And Nick? Nick was on the edge of everything. Present, but excluded. Troubled, but trusted. What if someone used that? What if someone knew he'd make the perfect scapegoat? At this point, you're probably asking, so who had that fifth code? Who accessed the house? And what exactly did they do between 9:30 p.m. and 10:45 p.m. when the cameras glitched? Because someone was in that house. And someone took the time to move those bodies. And someone administered a sedative that shouldn't have been in Michelle's system at that dose. We're talking about premeditation. We're talking about planning. And most importantly, we're talking about manipulation. But what came next changed the trajectory of the entire investigation. Because a private message was discovered, buried in an encrypted app on Rob Reiner's personal tablet. One message, sent to one contact, on the night of the murders. At 9:41 p.m., the message read, "Tell her not to come tonight. It's not safe." And the recipient? That's the part they didn't want anyone to know. Because when the message was decrypted, it was addressed to someone Jake had already warned about. And once her name came up, everything shifted again. Dates don't usually lie. They sit there, cold, fixed, absolute. But in the case of Rob and Michelle Reiner's murder, December 14th isn't just a date. It's a contradiction, a puzzle piece that doesn't fit. Because once you start peeling back the events leading up to that night, things stop adding up. Not just by minutes, but by days. And the deeper you go, the more you start to realize. What happened on December 14th may have started much earlier, and someone might have been counting on that confusion to get away with murder. Let's go back to the official reports. According to the autopsy findings, both Rob and Michelle were likely killed sometime between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. on the night of Sunday, December 14th. Romy finds the bodies around 7:12 a.m. Monday morning. Jake arrives shortly after. Nick is arrested within 24 hours. Open and shut, right? Except it's not. Because multiple witnesses report seeing Rob and Michelle alive after the alleged time of death. And not just in passing. They interacted with people. In person. Let's begin with a local grocery clerk. Her name is withheld from the official file, but she's on record stating that Michelle Reiner came into the upscale Brentwood market at 5:40 p.m. on Sunday, December 14th. She purchased fresh lemons, a bottle of white wine, and a bouquet of white lilies. All captured on CCTV. She was alone. Wearing sunglasses. Spoke politely. Didn't seem distressed. Receipts confirmed it. The timestamp? 5:42 p.m. Fine. That fits the timeline. Except here's where it twists. Another store employee claims Rob Reiner returned later that evening, around 9:15 p.m., asking about a specific brand of olive oil they had run out of earlier in the day. This was also confirmed by a time-stamped register log, 9:17 p.m., which means He was alive, and well, barely 30 minutes before the first security motion was detected inside the Reiner house at 9:23 p.m. Nothing strange, until you remember the tablet message uncovered during the autopsy investigation. The one Rob sent at 9:41 p.m. Tell her not to come tonight. It's not safe. Who was he talking about? Investigators eventually linked the recipient to a private number registered to a woman named Sasha Kellerman. Sasha was the same woman identified in Jake's original leaked photo, the one taken on the yacht in the Amalfi Coast. That's right, the former assistant, the rumored mistress, the woman who disappeared from the public eye after her NDA settlement. And now she was back. Not only that, Rob Reiner had been texting her on the night of his own murder. Why? Sources say Sasha had been planning to visit the estate. Privately, quietly. She and Rob were reportedly still in contact. Something Michelle allegedly found out about just days before her death. And that's when everything shifted. Because if Sasha was planning to come that night, and Rob tried to stop her, why? What did he know? What did he fear? And more importantly, did someone else not want her to show up? Let's revisit the timeline. 5:42 p.m., Michelle shops. Seen on CCTV. 9:17 p.m., Rob seen at same store. 9:23 p.m., motion sensor in house logs movement. 9:41 p.m., Rob texts Sasha, don't come. It's not safe. 10:14 to 10:21 p.m., cameras go dark. 10:45 p.m., shadowy figure heads toward guest house. 7:12 a.m., Romy discovers bodies. Seems straightforward, until the coroner's supplemental report drops. Because the supplemental findings suggest Michelle's body had more advanced rigor mortis than Rob's. Translation? She may have died hours before Rob. As in, on a different day entirely. Possibly late Saturday night, not Sunday. This upends everything. Because if Michelle died first, alone, then Rob was alive with her body in the house for potentially up to 24 hours. So now we have two options. Rob killed Michelle and was murdered later in retaliation. Someone else killed Michelle, and Rob discovered the body. But instead of calling the police, he staged, he messaged, and then he died, which would explain his cryptic warning to Sasha. It also explains a chilling new piece of evidence. One of the crime scene investigators, in an off-record conversation, said this. Rob Reiner's fingernails were clean, but under Michelle's? Fibers. Carpet. Someone dragged her. Dragged. Moved. Positioned. And the fibers didn't match the bedroom rug. They matched the upstairs hallway carpet, suggesting, again, that the bodies had been moved, that they didn't die where they were found, and maybe, not even when they were found. Now let's talk about motive. If Michelle was planning to leave Rob, and we know she had visited a divorce attorney just 2 weeks prior, then she was a threat to his image, his finances, his legacy. But Rob didn't file any counterclaims, didn't go public, didn't fight, because maybe he didn't see it coming. Or maybe he wasn't the one pulling strings anymore. Let's talk about Nick. Nick's attorney, in the pretrial motion, claimed something strange. That Nick had been out of the house entirely on the night of the 14th, visiting a friend across town until nearly midnight. At first, the prosecution dismissed it. But cell phone data later confirmed a 45-minute window where Nick's phone pinged towers miles away from the estate, between 9:30 p.m. and 10:15 p.m., the exact time when the house cameras went dark. So if Nick was away, and Rob was texting Sasha to stay away, and Michelle may have already been dead, who was in the house? And why hasn't that person's name come out yet? Now here's a final twist to the date. December 14th, 2025, was Rob and Michelle's wedding anniversary. Let that sink in. A 30-year marriage. And they both died, allegedly, on the anniversary of the day they promised to stay together. Jake later tweeted, "My parents' love story ended the way it began. Alone, in silence. Was it symbolic? Coincidental? Or was December 14th chosen intentionally by someone who wanted the date to send a message? Someone who wanted to turn their legacy into a cautionary tale? Someone who understood that dates don't just mark time, they control narratives. And now, the narrative is unraveling. Because if the timeline is wrong, if the bodies were moved, if Rob texted Sasha knowing something dangerous was unfolding, then the case against Nick Reiner is weaker than anyone thought. And the real killer may still be walking free. But what came next would flip the case on its head. Because when Jake dug deeper into his father's email archive, he discovered something hidden. An attachment. A document. A confession? No. Worse. It was a draft of a new will. One that changed everything. What does a man look like when his whole world collapses? Not in a court. Not in front of a judge. But standing barefoot in the driveway of his parents' estate, blinking against the morning sun, wearing the same clothes he wore the night before. That was Nick Reiner when they took him. No warning. No media. Just quiet handcuffs. And a family legacy shattering into fragments around him. But was Nick Reiner really the killer? Or was he the perfect fall guy in a story that had grown too dangerous to control? Let's rewind to the moment it all unraveled. 7:38 a.m. Police arrive at the Brentwood estate. 7:47 a.m. Romy, still trembling, gives her initial statement. 8:12 a.m. Officers knock on the guest house door. 8:20 a.m. Nick Reiner is escorted outside. No struggle. No shouting. He doesn't ask questions. But he doesn't look surprised, either. According to one of the officers on scene, Nick just stood there and said, "It finally happened." Cryptic, cold, and deeply suspicious. The media didn't get the story until the following afternoon. By then, Nick had been booked, fingerprinted, and held for questioning at LAPD's West Bureau. He wasn't charged yet, but the writing was on the wall. The only family member living on the property. A known history of addiction, bipolar disorder, past aggression, hospitalizations, rumors of fights with Rob. And then the big one. Security logs showed his code used on the main house door at 9:23 p.m., the same night his parents were killed. That detail, leaked to the press within hours, was a bombshell. It went viral. Every headline screamed the same thing. Nick Reiner accessed home before murders. But what those headlines didn't say? Nick's alibi, and the questions no one wanted to ask about the logs themselves. According to Nick's defense team, he left the property that night just after 9 p.m. He had dinner with a friend, drove across town, stayed until nearly midnight. Cell phone data confirmed that his phone did, in fact, ping off towers near Santa Monica between 9:30 and 10:15 p.m. That creates a gap, a crucial one, because the surveillance blackout in the Reiner home also occurred between 10:14 and 10:21 p.m., meaning, at worst, Nick would have had to leave the house, go to Santa Monica, return, kill both parents, stage the scene, clean up, and return to the guest house, all within 30 minutes. Logistically, it's possible, but not without leaving more evidence. And that's where the case starts falling apart. Because Nick's room? Clean. No blood. No clothes in the laundry. No knife. No cut marks. No DNA. Just nothing. Even the shoes he wore that night had no traceable fibers linking him to the scene, which left investigators with a dilemma. The only thing connecting Nick to the crime was access, a code. But remember what we discovered earlier? A fifth code, a temporary access pass, had been added to the system on December 1st, and it expired December 15th. No name, no digital owner. It was just called Temp Access 5, and it had been used exactly once, the night of the murders. Jake, who had stayed quiet in the aftermath of Nick's arrest, finally spoke 3 days later. He didn't hold a press conference. Didn't give a statement to the police. He tweeted one word. Framed. That tweet caught fire. The public began questioning everything. Had Jake and Nick teamed up? Was Jake trying to protect his brother? Or was Jake deflecting from something he'd done himself? It didn't help that Jake had also gone dark after releasing the photo of Rob on the yacht. No interviews. No posts. Just silence. That same silence that had swallowed the Reiner home. Nick was officially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder on December 18th. He pled not guilty, and his defense strategy was immediate. There is no forensic evidence tying my client to this crime. And they were right. All they had was the access code, the fact that he lived on the property, his history of instability, but no weapon, no confession, no fingerprints, no witnesses, and even worse for the prosecution, a motive that was growing more and more unstable. Because during a hearing, the Reiner family's private attorney let something slip. That Rob had recently drafted a new will. One that changed the inheritance structure. One that cut Nick out entirely. The attorney claimed the new will had not yet been signed. But a draft version had been found in Rob's encrypted email. uncovered during Jake's cooperation with authorities. In the new version, Romy and Jake would split the estate. Michelle's trust would retain ownership of the Brentwood property. Nick's share? Redirected to addiction treatment foundations. Motivation? Maybe. But here's the catch. The draft was saved on December 12th, 2 days before the murders. But the email with the draft had a strange subject line. To be executed Sunday. Not before. Sunday, December 14th, the day they died. Coincidence? Or was someone trying to make sure that will was never signed? Because if the original will stayed in place, Nick stood to inherit nearly $7 million. But if the new will went through, he'd get nothing. So now the prosecution had their motive. Greed, resentment, fear. They argued that Nick, having learned about the draft, acted before it could be finalized. But there was one problem. There's no proof Nick ever knew about the draft. No email access. No text messages. No mention in conversation. Unless someone told him. Someone who did have access. And guess who did? Jake. The courtroom drama grew intense. The media began to speculate.